products, dangerous drugs, car crash cases, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys of Hollis, Wright & Couch are here to serve you. With civil trial lawyer Josh Wright from the firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch and Alabama's 13 host David Lamb, the attorneys answer your tough legal questions straight ahead.
Hello and welcome into the attorneys. Appreciate you spending the next half hour with us here. Our topic of conversation tonight, on-the-job injuries and workers' compensation, what you need to know to make sure that your rights are protected. We're joined by Steve Couch of the firm Hollis, Wright & Couch. Steve, good to see you.
Good to see you. Good week, I trust.
Indeed it was.
Good.
Our topic of conversation today, workers' compensation. Looking forward to the next half hour.
Yeah, this show, and I'm really excited we're doing it because, you know, in the past we've done shows just about workers' compensation, and then we've done other shows that are like products liability, car accidents. This show, what we're going to try to do is kind of merge the two and show how they interrelate. For this one, I've brought on David Nomberg, good friend of mine, very accomplished and experienced lawyer. He works at the Nomberg Law Firm here in Birmingham. David, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
David, appreciate the time, and let's jump right into it. Help us understand what workers' compensation injury and what is that, and help us from a definition and a launching point.
Sure. First, it starts with an employee-employer relationship, and it's an injured worker or a worker getting injured on the job. It's doing their work, their normal duties, and they get injured while working for an employer. Okay. And as a result, they're entitled to certain benefits under Alabama law.
Okay. So that's kind of the overview and the launching off point. Just a reminder, and we're already getting some folks chiming in some questions. We welcome yours. You can call, text, or email those questions to us. That information will be on the screen throughout the program. A question, just kind of start a good basis point question here. If I'm injured while on the clock, what should my next step be?
First step should be to notify a supervisor, to let that supervisor know that you have been injured and how you were injured, and then of course ask for medical treatment. The employer is responsible for then sending the injured worker to their doctor for medical care.
Yeah, and as far as what David's talking about is notice. I mean, an employer under Alabama law has to have, well, they can have actual notice, they can have constructive notice. What I always tell people, whether I represent them or just advising them, I mean, always contact your employer, like David said. I prefer that they do it in a letter or email or something so it's documented, because I've seen a lot of cases, and David, you probably have too, where an employer is going to claim lack of notice. And if they have lack of notice, what they get under the law, or what an employee doesn't get under the law, is certain money for a certain period of time where they didn't give notice. So I agree with David that you need to give notice ASAP. And
we've got some other questions we'll get to, but in terms with this issue, what are some of the major misconceptions and misunderstandings and even mistakes that we most often make?
Well, I think first and foremost, the injured worker needs to understand that they can't go to their doctor right away. They've got to go to the company doctor, the doctor that the company assigns for them. But the trade-off is that it's free medical care. The employee doesn't pay for that treatment.
Okay. Well, that goes back to why you need to notify your employer so they can assign you a physician?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. The employer selects the initial treating physician, and then if the injured worker is dissatisfied with that treating physician and needs additional care, then the injured worker does have the right to select a new doctor from what's called a panel of 4 physicians.
Okay. How time sensitive is the pain? How important is it to go ahead and notify folks? If you maybe feel a pain and you're not sure it requires medical care and you'll wait, is that not a smart thing to do?
Under Alabama law, the injured worker needs to notify their employer or supervisor within 5 days verbal notice. Give 5 days. Within 5 days, you have to give verbal notice. Of the incident.
Okay.
Or they can provide written notice within 90 days. Mm-hmm. But to err on the side of caution, it's best to give the notice right away to the supervisor. Tell them what happened. Tell them they need medical treatment.
Yeah, and many times, like I said before, if depending on the type of accident you might be involved in or a loved one might be involved in, the employer's going to have actual notice. If it's a serious accident that happened at the plant and the person has to be taken out via ambulance or whatever, the employer's, of course, going to have notice. Yeah. Now, in those situations, and this is really the heart of what this show's about, just because you have a workers' compensation accident or on-the-job injury, what we're trying to do tonight is tell people and hopefully show them that you're not limited to just workers' compensation. Sometimes you are, but there are many times when you're not. If you're, for example, if there's a product, a machine that you're injured on, and it's a defective product, if you're a truck driver and you're going over the road and you might be talking about somebody who causes the accident, that's kind of what we're here to talk about tonight. Not only what you can get under workers' compensation type cases, but also letting people know that there may be other avenues of recovery, because like I've learned over my career, and David knows too, Alabama's workers' compensation system, in my mind, it should be retitled Alabama's partial workers' compensation system, and we'll get into that later tonight.
Yeah. And as I was, oftentimes when we discuss these issues, we like to keep them local, statewide. How does the state of Alabama compare in terms of workers' compensation and the rights and the enforcement of those laws?
There are some good advantages under Alabama law for injured workers, and that is free medical treatment on the injured body part, and that's for life. But there are some definite problems with our law. The compensation schedule is very low. It's almost punitive in nature. It has not been changed since 1985 in some respects, and so we're 25 years behind where we need to be.
Okay. All right. Another question we've got here: what is necessary for me to begin receiving workers' compensation benefits?
Well, let me take that one first. I think first and foremost, you have to have an on-the-job injury that's in the line and scope of your employment. If that happens, and you're at an employer who has more than 5 employees, then you're entitled to workers' compensation benefits under Alabama law. As soon as you give your employer notice or have to be taken to the hospital, those medical bills that are generated from that treatment are paid for by the employer's insurance company, workers' compensation insurance company. Likewise, you're also immediately entitled to wages or part of your wages. And that too is supposed to be taken care of by the workers' compensation insurance company, with the idea being that because you're out of work, as long as you had an on-the-job injury, you should get something to support yourself and your family. So my answer to your question is, or the person's question is, immediately. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. And that kind of ties in, Steve, with our next question. The company that this individual is working for is providing medical treatment and paying me my wages even though I am not working. So apparently an injury that has shelved them for a while. Should I be satisfied with that? Again, providing medical treatment and paying the wages.
I think there are additional benefits that injured worker may be entitled to receive. They're entitled to receive reimbursement on their mileage when they go to the doctor, the pharmacist, or the physical therapist. But once they're finished with once they're finished treating, they may be entitled to additional compensation for a physical impairment, or they may be entitled to compensation for what's known as a vocational loss if they're unable to return to their previous job where they were injured, or they can't find additional work making the same or greater wages than they were making when they got hurt.
Yeah, as far as this person being satisfied, that's a very subjective type answer. I mean, I don't know what's going to satisfy this person or not. I can tell you that under Alabama's workers' compensation law, and here's the nut of the problem that I have with it. What you get is 2/3 of your average weekly wage. That's what an employer's insurance company is responsible for paying you. All right? And the problem that I have with that is that, well, I think anybody would try paying 2/3 of your mortgage. What's going to happen? You're going to be homeless.
They won't appreciate that.
Yeah, 2/3 of your car payment, you'll be walking. Just tell your children you're only going to get 2/3 of your dinner tonight, and that's not going to go over too well either. So, I mean, that's ultimately the problem that I have with the workers' compensation system as written, is that I believe, and many others do as well, that you don't get full compensation. You only get partial compensation. And the legal trade-off, if you look at the history, is, well, it's easier to recover in a workers' compensation case, because all you have to do, it doesn't matter if it's partially your fault or not, all it has to be is in the line and scope of your employment. And in trade-off, you get your compensation. What they don't talk about is it's only 2/3, so that's not enough, and that's really what we're going to talk about hopefully in the next segment, or start talking about, is what avenues of recovery are there other than workers' compensation.
Right. Well, let's do that. Time for our first break. As we head to break, reminder, we'd love to hear from you. You can call, text, or email your questions to us. You can find the firm on Facebook. Just search Hollis, Wright & Couch. Also find them on Twitter, Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. Our panel of experts on the attorneys will be right back.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch, and thanks for watching The Attorneys on Alabama's 13. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never need legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to this show or related to other civil legal matters, call, email, or text us to talk with one of our lawyers. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter to learn about important legal news that could affect you or your family. Or simply contact us by going to alabamas13.com and click on the Attorneys link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and for watching The Attorneys right here on Alabama's 13.
In is on-the-job injuries and workers' compensation. We'd love to get your questions and take them to our panel of experts. You can call, text, or email those questions to us all throughout the program. A couple of segments left, so plenty of time for you to get your questions in to us. Gentlemen, one of the questions that we've received, let's see. What should I watch out for after I report my workers' compensation injury to my employer?
Good question.
That is a good question. Injured workers need to make sure they're going to their doctor's appointments and staying compliant with the medical course of treatment recommended by their doctor. They need to be mindful that if they're working with an adjuster from the insurance company or a case nurse that works for the insurance company, those individuals are not working for the injured worker. They're working for the insurance company, and they are not necessarily looking out for the best interest of that injured worker.
Do they identify themselves as such, or is sometimes that kind of kept secret?
Sometimes they will identify themselves, but sometimes they won't. And there's a reason they don't want to identify themselves or what they're doing. And the injured worker might not understand that relationship, and they don't understand that they're not working in the best interest of the worker.
Okay.
Insurance companies will conduct surveillance on injured workers. They will follow them, monitor them, and it's all done in efforts to try to block that injured worker from receiving benefits that they should receive.
Yeah. David makes a great point. These case management nurses is what they'll call themselves. Sometimes they're employed by a third-party company. Many times they're employed by the insurance company themselves. They have told me personally in the past, I'm here to coordinate care for your client. And what they'll do is they'll follow the client to all the doctor's appointments. They'll make doctor's appointments for them, follow-up care, etc. Then they'll go to the actual appointment and be in the room during the examination.
Wow.
I've got an issue with that in that why does a grown man, adult, or grown woman, why do they need somebody to follow them around to their doctor's appointments? Well, in my opinion, here's why. Because they want to be in there, ask the doctor certain questions so that they can forward care, hopefully shorten it, because when you think about it, the longer the person is under the care of a physician, the more the insurance company will have to pay out. So what they'll do is they'll start asking, well, how much longer should he be treated for this, and what do you think about this alternative method of care? They're asking doctors these questions, and I'm always a proponent of let a doctor practice medicine. That's what he or she went to medical school for. Let them go. They don't need your help in doing that. So it's funny because if I show up to a doctor's appointment, and I do that sometimes. I used to do it all the time. Now I show up to ones where I know a nurse is going to be in there, and I'll go in there too. And it's funny how the tenor of the entire meeting or the examination goes when a lawyer's sitting in there and a nurse will ask her questions to the doctor, and I'll ask him some too. And it's just so funny how it comes out so differently. And many lawyers, and I know David will do that, will also go to doctor's appointments. It's just funny how it comes out. I agree with you about the surveillance. Many people will be surveilled. They're trying to check to see if the person's faking it or exaggerating. And
is it
stuff
all
like
under
that.
the guise of eliminating fraud or fraudulent activity?
Yeah, that's what they'll go with. Of course, if the surveillance show that the person is actually injured or that they can't do this, that surveillance will oftentimes never surface in the lawsuit itself. You'll never even know about it.
Yeah.
You know, that happens a lot, unfortunately, and that's I don't agree with it.
And another question that we've got in: if I'm injured at work, am I only entitled to workers' compensation benefits?
Well, you want to?
Well, the answer is no, especially if we're looking at a third-party case where an injured worker was injured by a third party. A common occurrence is a car accident. An employee is working for his company, he's driving down the road, he's injured by or another vehicle runs into him. That's what we call a third-party case.
All right.
So there's products liability cases that may arise out of these as well.
Yeah, and it's important that a lawyer, whoever it is, look into those areas that David just mentioned, because when you're injured on the job, and I think maybe a good way to explain this is telling people what you don't get, what you're not entitled to receive under workers' compensation, whatever the case is. You are not entitled to get emotional distress damages. You are not entitled to receive, and you will not get, mental anguish damages. Pain, suffering, you won't get any of that stuff. Moreover, like I said, you're only going to receive 2/3 of your average weekly wage. What happens to the other third? Does it just disappear? Well, if your lawyer looks at these possible third-party avenues, those types of damages, along with punitive damages, those are, unlike a workers' compensation case, those are recoverable rather in a third-party case. But not every workers' compensation action on the job injury will involve a third-party case. It's, you know, you got to be wary that these potential products liability cases are out there. These potential regular tort cases, car accident, for example. You got to be aware that they're out there, and your lawyer should be aware of those things, and he or she is going to be looking out for those, I hope.
Yeah, that's why that's why an injured worker needs to meet with a lawyer, because from a workers' compensation claim, there may be 3 or 4 additional cases that injured worker didn't know about, and they need a lawyer to investigate that for them.
And if the worker is just dealing with the adjuster, whoever it is, man, woman, whatever company, you know, they'll explain the workers' compensation benefits to the injured worker. They say, you don't need to go get an attorney. Here's what you're going to get. Let's just, you know, do this. We'll walk into court, get it approved. That happens sometimes. But what that adjuster, who's not going to be a lawyer, sometimes they will be, but what they won't tell them, like David said, they're not on the injured worker's side. They're not their advocate. So they won't tell them you got a potential products liability case here, you got a potential claim against the person who caused the car accident. They won't explain that thing, and that's why it's important to get to a lawyer.
It sounds as though the field is a bit tilted. If I'm injured on the job, it sounds as though the field's a bit tilted out of my favor, because it sounds as though the insurance companies will have fantastic representation. They've got individuals checking all sorts of things. If you go about it without anyone on your side, it sounds like you could easily get steamrolled.
All right, it's you against the insurance industry.
Yeah.
That's practically speaking, that's what it is.
And a lawyer that represents injured workers can help level that playing field.
Yeah, and someone who is knowledgeable of those ways. I mean, oftentimes we talk about folks with some expertise in this arena. I would think someone with some knowledge and some experience, having fought these battles before, it seems in this instance more important maybe than in some of the other cases that you take.
Oh, sure. Oftentimes, most of the time, people will be aware, I'm entitled to workers' compensation benefits. Many lawyers are experienced in workers' compensation law, as is David and her firm, or his firm. But what many lawyers, and this is certainly not an indictment to the folks who on the same side of the board as me, but sometimes they won't look at potential products liability cases and other potential third-party cases out there. You know, if for the viewers of this show, if that ever happens to them or a family member, et cetera, just ask their lawyer, whoever it is there any other type of lawsuit other than workers' compensation? You know, and like I said, there's a lot of lawyers like David who have dealt in both arenas, and it's good to have somebody who's got that type of experience, because they will take care of you. They'll take care of it.
That sounds good, and that's a good spot for us to take our next break. Coming up, the final segment of the attorneys. But as we head into our break, we'd love to hear from you. Still a few minutes remaining for you to get in touch with us. You can call, text, or email. Also find them on Facebook. Search Hollis, Wright, and Counts. On Twitter, you'll find them Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. The final segment of the attorneys coming right up.
From all of us at the law firm of Hollis, Wright, and Couch, we're glad to have you here with us every Sunday night on Alabama's 13. This week, we're discussing workers' compensation and third-party liability. This show will help you learn what to expect if you're injured on the job and what compensation and benefits may be available to you. Workers' compensation benefits are limited in nature, but you may want to consult with an attorney to ensure that you are receiving all the benefits you are entitled to under your state's workers' compensation laws. In addition, you may be entitled to more than just workers' compensation benefits if a third party, such as a manufacturer, is responsible for your injuries. These can include things such as pain and suffering, mental anguish, future medical care, punitive damages, and all your lost wages and future lost earnings can be included. Consult with an attorney so they can investigate and evaluate your potential third-party claim. Please remember your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis, Wright & Couch want to help answer your questions on real issues you face in your life. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. As always, thanks for watching The Attorneys, right here on Alabama's 13.
Attorneys, quick reminder, this is our final segment, but a few minutes remaining. If you would like to get your question into our panel of experts, you could call, text, or email that information to us. That's there on the bottom of your screen. Let's go right to a question here in our final segment. We've heard third parties referred to, a question here about third parties. How is a third-party recovery different than the benefits I would receive under workers' compensation?
Third-party recovery will allow you to be compensated for pain and suffering, emotional distress, mental anguish, lost wages, and possibly even punitive damages. So the recovery is potentially a lot greater than what you receive in a workers' compensation case, and the recovery is definitely different than what you receive in a workers' compensation case.
Yeah, and third party, we've talked about it off and on. I just want to be clear. What we're talking about with third party cases is this. In Alabama, you can't sue your employer for anything but workers' compensation benefits, which are all statutorily laid out. There are circumstances when you can sue others, third parties, if you will. That's what we were talking about. In certain situations, certain fact patterns, and certain accidents. For example, and I know you mentioned this before, if a person, say, operating a saw and there's something defective about the saw, there's a potential products liability case there. If you are a truck driver and somebody causes you to run off the road, some wary, wanton other driver who's drunk or otherwise causes you to get injured, there's a potential third-party case against not only the person who caused it, but also some underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage that covers the driver even though he's working. Your own personal UIM can cover you. Moreover, employers will often have and UIM automobile coverages on their drivers, so there's that type of recovery too, and so there's a whole gamut of potential types of cases, be it property owners, contractors, subcontractors, anybody who is not your employer, who causes or contributes to your accident and thus your injury. There's potential liability for those third parties under Alabama law. Now, what we haven't mentioned tonight, and I'm going to let you explain a little bit on this, is insurance. When you get workers' compensation benefits and then you bring a third party, it's not a double recovery under the law, and Dave is very familiar with that. Right. Will you talk about that?
Sure. To a point you just mentioned, all those different scenarios about potential recoveries, the insurance company is not going to tell you about that. The work comp carrier is not going to tell you about that. That's why the injured worker needs to meet with an experienced attorney that handles workers' compensation but also handles car wrecks or third-party cases or products liability cases, so that lawyer can investigate those cases for them. Now, concerning subrogation, subrogation loosely defined is when you receive a recovery from a third party but insurance paid for your medical treatment, then the insurance company that paid for the medical treatment is likely going to be able to recover some of the money they paid out on the injured worker's behalf if the injured worker is recovering from a third party. And again, confusing a little bit, but to lawyers that work in this field, it's something we deal with on a daily basis. And again, that's why you need an attorney helping you with this.
And oftentimes people get frustrated because they get workers' compensation benefits or partial benefits, right, like I was talking about earlier, and then there may be a successful third-party recovery from an automobile driver, et cetera, and then they're kind of shocked to learn, well, I didn't know I had to pay the workers' compensation folks back. Isn't that what they pay insurance premiums for? You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is what they pay insurance premiums for. Unfortunately, the law says you got to pay them back.
Right.
They think it's a double recovery or a windfall, if you will. And while I disagree with that, but unfortunately that's the law and you have to pay it back.
We've got about a minute and a half remaining in the program, so time for our final thoughts. And David, we'll start with you.
Thank you. When a worker's injured on the job, again, it's important to notify a supervisor immediately. And not only that, ask for medical treatment if you're injured. You've got to ask for that medical care. It's not something that the employer is necessarily going to do right away for you. If you're injured, you need to meet with an attorney experienced in workers' compensation and personal injury. Don't go see a bankruptcy lawyer if you have an on-the-job injury.
Yeah.
Okay, if you need a bankruptcy lawyer, it's because you file in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
But go to a lawyer experienced in the field that you were injured in, such as workers' compensation.
Steve?
Well, I just say, on-the-job injuries, don't be satisfied with just workers' compensation. Ask your lawyer, whoever it is there any other avenues of recovery here? Because, in many situations like we've talked about tonight, there are. Right. And it's important, like David said, to get with a lawyer who is experienced in both areas. That person, if they're not, hopefully they'll recommend somebody that is. And lawyers like myself and David, we work on contingency fees, and it doesn't cost people anything to ask those questions.
All right, good stuff, and an interesting program tonight. David, Steve, appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, David.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you being with us as well. Here are some ways you can get in touch with the firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch, even after we go off the air. Also find them on Facebook, search Hollis, Wright & Couch, and on Twitter, it's Hollis_Wright. You'll find them there. We appreciate your time, and we'll look for you next time right here on The Attorneys.